The crystalline spires of Nethys Prime caught the triple sunset in a cascade of amber light, casting long shadows across the refugee camps that had sprawled beyond the city's protective barriers. Zephyria pressed her scaled palm against the observation deck's transparent steel window, watching thousands of displaced beings huddle beneath makeshift shelters. The sight never failed to twist something deep in her chest cavity, where her species kept their emotional core. As the Galactic Council's special envoy for vulnerable species protection, Zephyria had witnessed countless tragedies across the spiral arms, but nothing had prepared her for the systematic elimination campaign that had begun 6 cycles ago. The attacks were precise, calculated, and utterly merciless. They targeted only the weakest civilizations, those without advanced military capabilities, those still struggling with basic space travel, those whose only crime was existing in resource-rich systems. Another distress signal from the Kepler sector, announced the Lion, her aide, his voice carrying the weight of exhaustion that had become endemic among the council staff. His 6 limbs moved with mechanical precision as he updated the holographic display, adding another red marker to the growing constellation of destroyed worlds. The Miratel colony on Verdun 3. Complete orbital bombardment. No survivors detected. Zephyria's throat sac deflated with a sound like escaping steam. The Miratel were gardeners, their entire culture built around cultivating life. Their weapons technology barely qualified as kinetic projectiles, and their ships were designed for nurturing ecosystems rather than warfare. They had been one of the most peaceful species in the galaxy, and now they were extinct. "Response time from our nearest patrol fleet?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would disappoint her. 14 standard hours, assuming they received the distress call immediately, the Lion replied, his primary arms gesturing helplessly. By the time they arrived, the attackers had been gone for 12 hours. Same pattern as always, swift, devastating, and completely untraceable. Commander Kestrix entered the chamber with the heavy footfalls that marked his species' evolved gravity adaptations. His exoskeleton bore fresh scars from the Helios incident, where he had personally led the evacuation of 3 million ephemerid civilians while their crystal cities crumbled under plasma bombardment. The rescue had been successful, but the weight of those who hadn't made it to the transport ships still haunted his compound eyes. "The Archon Council is convening an emergency session," Kestrix announced, his mandibles clicking with agitation. "They're demanding explanations we don't have and solutions we can't provide. Half of them are suggesting we abandon the Outer Rim territories entirely and consolidate our defensive positions around the core worlds." The suggestion sent waves of revulsion through Zephyria's nervous system. The Outer Rim was home to hundreds of developing civilizations, species that had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel or were still confined to their home systems. To abandon them would be tantamount to signing their death warrants. "What about the Nilotha refugees?" she asked, thinking of the gentle amphibious beings who had arrived 3 days ago with tales of their homeworld's destruction. They communicated through bioluminescent patterns on their skin, and their grief had painted them in colors that had no names in any known language. "Temporary housing in Sector 7, Kestrix replied. "Though I'm not sure how temporary it will remain. Their worldship construction techniques are unique. They'll need significant time to adapt to our technology if they're going to rebuild elsewhere." Zephyria moved away from the window, her mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. The attackers remained completely anonymous, their vessels unlike anything in the galactic database. They appeared without warning, struck with overwhelming force, and vanished before any meaningful resistance could be mounted. Intelligence suggested they possessed technology decades ahead of even the most advanced council member species. "There has to be something we're missing," she muttered, calling up tactical displays with fluid gestures. "No species achieves this level of technological superiority overnight. Someone, somewhere, has encountered them before." Thalian's chromatophores shifted to skeptical purple. "We've queried every database, contacted every historical archive. These attackers are ghosts, no prior contact, no known origin, no traceable technology signatures." A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. The holographic display shifted to show the worried face of Administrator Veleth from the Kepler border station, his usually pristine plumage ruffled with stress. "Envoy Zephyria, we have multiple civilian vessels requesting emergency asylum. Another 3 systems have gone dark in the past 6 hours. The refugee convoys are overwhelming our processing capabilities, and our escort fleets are stretched beyond any reasonable limit." Before Zephyria could respond, Veletha's image flickered with interference. Warning klaxons began blaring in the background of his transmission, and his eyes widened with terror. Unknown vessels approaching. They're not responding to our identification requests and their energy signatures are, by the void, they're massive. All stations, this is. The transmission cut to static, leaving the 3 council members staring at empty air where Velitha's frightened face had been moments before. Another border station had fallen, another guardian eliminated, another step closer to the core worlds where billions of vulnerable beings had nowhere left to run. The emergency session of the Archon Council convened in the Great Spiral Chamber, its curved walls designed to accommodate the diverse physiologies of 47 member species. The air recyclers worked overtime to maintain atmospheric conditions suitable for the various respiratory systems present, creating gentle currents that carried the mingled sense of fear and determination. High Archon Thessarian, ancient even by Altarian standards, raised her crystalline staff to call for order. Her voice resonated through both audio frequencies and quantum harmonics, ensuring every species present could understand. We gather in the shadow of unprecedented catastrophe. In 6 cycles we have lost 43 colony worlds, 8 border stations, and an estimated 15 million sentient beings to these unknown aggressors. Zephyria sat in the envoy section, her scaled skin unconsciously shifting to match the chamber's neutral tones, a biological response to stress that her people had never quite managed to suppress. Around her, representatives from across the galaxy displayed their own species markers of anxiety and grief. Counselor Drexina of the Hegemony faction rose with predatory grace, her people's warrior heritage evident in every calculated movement. With respect, High Archon, we cannot continue throwing resources at a problem we don't understand. The attacks exclusively target pre-warp and early warp civilizations. Perhaps it's time to accept that some species are simply not meant to survive the transition to galactic citizenship. A wave of outraged protests erupted from multiple delegations. Zephyria found herself on her feet before she consciously decided to stand, her throat sac inflating with righteous anger. Counselor Drexina, you speak of sentient beings as if they were failed experiments. The Miratel had contributed botanical advances that fed dozens of worlds. The Nilotha possessed mathematical insights that revolutionized our understanding of quantum mechanics. Their value cannot be measured solely by their military capabilities. Their contributions become irrelevant when they cannot survive to make them, Drexina countered, her predator's eyes glinting with cold logic. We face an enemy with overwhelming technological superiority. Our duty is to the species that can actually defend themselves and contribute to our collective security. Commander Kestrix accessed the chamber's central display, projecting tactical analyses that painted a grim picture. The enemy's pattern is accelerating. Initial attacks were spaced 20 to 30 standard days apart. Recent strikes are occurring every 3 to 4 days. At this rate, they'll complete their Outer Rim campaign within 2 cycles. And then they'll move toward the core worlds, added Admiral Synthan, her aquatic breathing apparatus bubbling with agitation. Whatever their ultimate objective, the systematic elimination of vulnerable species appears to be merely the opening phase. High Archon Thessarian staff chimed with somber harmonics. Our analysis suggests they're testing our response capabilities while eliminating potential allies. By targeting only the weakest civilizations, they ensure we cannot rally a unified defense while simultaneously reducing the galaxy's overall population and resource base. The strategic implications settled over the chamber like a toxic cloud. If the unknown aggressors were methodically removing galactic civilization piece by piece, the Council faced a choice between abandoning the vulnerable or stretching their forces so thin that everyone became vulnerable. There may be another option, the Lion announced from the aid gallery, his voice carrying across the chamber's acoustics. We've detected unusual energy signatures at 3 of the most recent attack sites. The readings don't match anything in our databases, but they're definitely not from the attackers. Zephyria felt her secondary heart accelerate. What kind of energy signatures? Unknown propulsion systems, exotic matter manipulation, and what appears to be weaponry based on principles our physicists can't identify, the Lion continued. The signatures appear after the attacks begin but before our response fleets arrive. Murmurs of speculation rippled through the assembled delegates. Counselor Drexina leaned forward with predatory interest. Another faction of aggressors? Perhaps these attackers have enemies of their own. Or protectors, Zephyria suggested, her mind racing through possibilities. Someone else might be trying to defend the vulnerable species. Admiral Synthan's translator crackled as she spoke. Our fastest response time to any Outer Rim distress call is 8 hours. These unknown signatures appear within 2 hours of attacks beginning. Either they're incredibly lucky, or they were already in position. Which suggests they know when and where the attacks will occur, Commander Kestrix observed, his compound eyes reflecting tactical possibilities. Intelligence-gathering capabilities that exceed our own. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Somewhere in the galaxy, an unknown force possessed the technology to detect imminent attacks and the capability to respond faster than the Council's own fleets. The question remained whether this force was an ally, an enemy, or something else entirely. I'm authorizing deep-range reconnaissance missions to the 3 sites where these signatures were detected, High Archon Thessarian announced. We need to understand what we're dealing with before making any strategic decisions. Zephyria rose again, her decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. High Archon, I request permission to lead the reconnaissance mission personally. As Special Envoy for Vulnerable Species Protection, I have the authority to initiate first contact protocols if we encounter whoever is responsible for these signatures. Granted, Thessarian replied without hesitation. Commander Kestrix, prepare a stealth-capable vessel and your best Xenocontact team. If there are unknown protectors operating in our galaxy, we need to know their intentions. As the council session concluded and delegates began filing out, Zephyria remained in her seat, staring at the holographic display showing the ever-growing constellation of destroyed worlds. Somewhere among those points of light, mysterious forces were moving with purposes unknown. Whether they would prove to be salvation or yet another threat remained to be seen, but for the first time in cycles she felt the faintest stirring of hope. The stealth vessel Whispered Truth dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 447 system, its hull automatically adjusting its molecular structure to bend electromagnetic radiation around its frame. Commander Kestrix monitored the ship's systems with practiced efficiency while Zephyria studied the tactical displays showing the remnants of what had once been the Ephemerid research station on the system's 3rd moon. Debris field extends roughly 12,000 kilometers from the original station position, reported Chief Scanner Operator Nixera, her tentacles dancing across her console with fluid precision. Mass displacement suggests complete structural destruction rather than internal explosion. Whatever hit them applied force from multiple vectors simultaneously. The Lion floated in his zero-gravity harness, his people's natural adaptation to space making him invaluable for extended reconnaissance missions. Environmental readings show traces of exotic particle discharge consistent with the unknown energy signatures. The concentrations are strongest near what appears to be a debris cluster approximately 4,000 kilometers spinward. Zephyria felt her throat sack contract with anticipation. The Ephemerid had been mathematicians and philosophers, their research station dedicated to understanding the geometric principles underlying faster-than-light travel. Their destruction had been particularly senseless. They possessed no military assets whatsoever and their research was freely shared with anyone who requested it. Take us in slowly, Kestrix ordered, his mandibles clicking with concentration. Full passive sensors only. If our mysterious protectors are still in the area, I don't want to spook them with active scans. The Whispered Truth glided through the debris field with ghost-like silence, its adaptive hull automatically adjusting to avoid detection by any conceivable scanning method. Fragments of the Ephemerid station tumbled past the viewports, pieces of their crystalline architecture that had once housed some of the galaxy's most brilliant minds, now reduced to glittering wreckage. Contact, Nixera announced suddenly, her voice tight with excitement. Single vessel, approximately 2,000 kilometers directly ahead. Configuration unknown, energy signature matches our target parameters. The main display shifted to show their discovery, and the bridge crew fell silent with collective amazement. The vessel was unlike anything in the galactic database. Its design seemed to flow rather than follow conventional engineering principles, as if someone had taken the concepts of efficiency and elegance and merged them into physical form. Its hull appeared to be composed of a dark material that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, and strange geometries suggested internal structures that defied standard physics. Dimensions? Kestrix asked, though his voice carried an undertone of awe. Approximately 800 meters length, 300 meters beam, Nixera replied. But the readings are inconsistent. It's as if the vessel exists in several dimensions simultaneously. Zephyria leaned forward in her command chair, her scales automatically shifting to excited silver patterns. Any signs of damage from the engagement? None detectable. In fact, the vessel appears to be conducting some sort of salvage operation. Multiple smaller craft are retrieving specific pieces of debris. The Lion adjusted his position to get a better view of the tactical display. They're not just collecting random wreckage. Look at the selection pattern. They're specifically targeting fragments containing ephemerid bioneural networks and memory crystals. The implication struck the bridge crew simultaneously. The unknown vessel wasn't just cleaning up after the battle, it was preserving the intellectual legacy of the destroyed civilization. The ephemerids stored their collective knowledge in crystalline matrices that could theoretically be recovered and reconstructed. But only someone with intimate knowledge of their technology would know which fragments contained irreplaceable data. They're trying to save what they can, Zephyria whispered, her emotional core resonating with a mixture of hope and profound sadness. Whoever they are, they understand what was lost here. A new contact appeared on the sensors. One of the smaller craft had detached from the main vessel and was approaching their position. Kestrix's compound eyes tracked the newcomer with military precision while his hands moved to the weapon's controls. "Should I raise shields?" he asked, though his tone suggested he didn't consider the approaching craft a threat. "No," Zephyria decided immediately. "If they wanted to harm us, they could have done so already. I think they want to talk." The smaller craft was an elegant thing, its design echoing the larger vessel's flowing aesthetics. As it drew closer, the Whispered Truth's communications array detected an incoming signal on frequencies reserved for first contact protocols. "Universal translator engaged," the Lion announced. The signal structure suggests linguistic patterns, but the base language is completely unknown. The communication speaker crackled to life, and a voice emerged, clearly artificial, but with undertones that suggested sophisticated emotional modeling. "Vessel of the Galactic Council, we detect your presence. We mean no harm to your people or your mission." Zephyria exchanged glances with Kestrix before activating the response channel. "Unknown vessel, this is Special Envoy Zephyria of the Galactic Council. We're investigating the destruction of this system's research station. Can you provide information about what occurred here?" "The station was attacked by vessels of the Devourers," the voice replied, introducing a term that sent chills through the translation matrix. "We arrived during the final phase of their assault but were unable to prevent the destruction. We are now preserving what knowledge we can recover." "Devourers?" Zephyria repeated. "Is that what you call the unknown aggressors?" "It is what they call themselves when they choose to communicate at all. They consume civilizations for purposes we do not fully understand. We oppose them when possible." Commander Kestrix leaned toward the communication station. "Who are you? What species do you represent?" The pause that followed stretched long enough that Zephyria began to wonder if the connection had been lost. When the voice returned, it carried notes of something that might have been melancholy. "We are what remains of a species you once knew as human. We have been fighting the Devourers for longer than your current civilizations have existed. This galaxy was our home before we were forced to become something else." The revelation hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. Humans, the legendary species that had vanished from galactic records over 2,000 years ago, leaving behind only ruins and myths. According to the historical archives, they had been explorers and protectors, but their ultimate fate had remained one of the galaxy's greatest mysteries. "You're human?" Zephyria breathed, her throat sac barely managing to form the words. "We were," the voice confirmed. "Now we are guardians of what we could not save the first time. The Devourers took our worlds, our people, our future. We will not allow them to take yours." The smaller craft docked with the Whispered Truth using connection protocols that seemed to adapt automatically to their ship's configuration. Zephyria stood in the airlock antechamber, her scales shifting through nervous color patterns while Kestrix positioned himself strategically with a clear line of sight to both entrances. The historical implications of this moment pressed down on her like the weight of entire worlds. When the airlock cycled open, the being that emerged defied every expectation she had formed during the journey through the connection tunnel. It was humanoid in basic structure but clearly had been extensively modified. Its skin had a metallic sheen that spoke of nanotechnological integration, its eyes held depths that suggested cybernetic enhancement, and its movements carried a fluid precision that transcended normal biological limitations. "I am Valen," the being said, its voice carrying the same emotional undertones they had heard over the communications channel. "I speak for the remnant fleet. Thank you for allowing this meeting." Zephyria found her diplomatic training taking over despite her awe. "I am Special Envoy Zephyria, and this is Commander Kestrix. We represent the Galactic Council's efforts to protect vulnerable species from the attacks you call the Devourers." Valen's enhanced eyes focused on her with an intensity that felt like being scanned by sophisticated sensors. "The Council's efforts are admirable but insufficient. The Devourers have studied your response patterns for decades. They know exactly how long it takes your fleets to reach threatened systems. But you can respond faster, Kestrix observed, his military mind immediately grasping the tactical implications. We never left, Valen replied simply. When the Devourers consumed our worlds, those of us who survived abandoned conventional existence. We became the Watchers in the Void, the guardians of the spaces between stars. We exist where they cannot easily detect us, and we move through dimensions they cannot access. Zephyria felt her emotional core resonating with a mixture of admiration and profound sadness. You've been fighting them for 2 millennia? Alone. Not alone, Valen corrected, gesturing toward the larger vessel visible through the observation ports. We saved what we could, not just humans but representatives of dozens of species the Devourers consumed in their early expansion. We became a collective of survivors, bound together by shared loss and common purpose. They moved to the ship's primary conference chamber, where the holographic displays showed tactical analyses of the Devourer attacks. Valen studied the data with the absorbed attention of someone who had spent lifetimes understanding the enemy's patterns. Your analysis is accurate but incomplete, Valen said, manipulating the display with gestures that seemed to interface directly with the ship's systems. The Devourers don't just destroy civilizations, they harvest them. Each attack yields biological samples, technological innovations and cultural databases that feed their expansion capabilities. New data streams appeared on the display, showing attack patterns and resource extractions that the Council had never detected. The Lion, who had joined them for the briefing, made soft sounds of distress as the true scope of the Devourer operations became clear. They're farming the galaxy, the Lion whispered. Allowing civilizations to develop just enough to become useful, then harvesting them at optimal efficiency. The vulnerable species you protect are not random targets, Valen confirmed. They represent specific developmental stages that provide the Devourers with particular resources. The Miratel's biological expertise, the Ephemerid's mathematical insights, the Nilotha's quantum mechanics innovations, each contributes to their growing capabilities. Commander Kestrix leaned forward with predatory intensity. How do we stop them? Valen's expression shifted to something that might have been hope tempered by centuries of bitter experience. Individual victories are possible, we have saved hundreds of thousands of lives over the millennia. But ultimate victory requires something we have never possessed, a unified galactic response with technology capable of matching their capabilities. What would that require? Zephyria asked, though she suspected the answer would be overwhelming. A complete revolution in your understanding of physics, engineering and warfare, Valen replied without hesitation. The Devourers have consumed thousands of civilizations. Their technology represents the accumulated knowledge of species you have never heard of, innovations that transcend anything in your current databases. The weight of that revelation settled over the chamber like a shroud. The Galactic Council represented the most advanced civilizations in known space, but they were facing an enemy that had absorbed the knowledge of thousands of extinct species. However, Valen continued, you possess something we lost long ago, hope for the future. Our existence has become focused entirely on preservation and resistance. We can save individual species, protect isolated populations, but we cannot envision a galaxy where the Devourers no longer threaten the innocent. Zephyria felt something crystallizing in her mind, a possibility that was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. What if we combined our approaches? The Council's unity and hope with your knowledge and capabilities. The thought has occurred to us, Valen admitted, but it would require unprecedented cooperation and risk. The Devourers have remained unaware of our true capabilities because we have never revealed them in a major engagement. Full alliance with the Council would end our anonymity and expose you to the same fate that befell your original civilization, Kestrix realized. Yes, Valen confirmed. We would be gambling our continued existence on the possibility that this time, united with the current galactic civilizations, we might achieve more than mere survival. The chamber fell silent as the implications registered. The humans and their allies had sacrificed everything to become guardians of the galaxy, existing in the shadows to protect others from the fate that had befallen them. Now they were being asked to risk that eternal vigil for the chance at something greater. How long do we have to decide? Zephyria asked. Valen manipulated the tactical display to show predicted Devourer movement patterns. Based on their current acceleration, they will begin targeting intermediate development worlds within 10 cycles. Once they start harvesting Council member species, the balance of power will shift irreversibly in their favor. 10 cycles to convince the Council to undertake the greatest gamble in galactic history, the Lion murmured. 10 cycles to choose between certain gradual defeat and possible salvation, Valen corrected. The choice ultimately belongs to your people. We will continue our vigil regardless, but the opportunity for true victory may not come again. The journey back to Nethys Prime took 3 standard days, during which Zephyria found herself unable to focus on routine diplomatic tasks. The revelation that humans had not only survived their civilization's destruction but had spent 2 millennia fighting a hidden war to protect the galaxy fundamentally altered her understanding of everything she thought she knew about galactic history. Valen had provided them with data crystals containing partial records of the human transformation, how survivors had integrated with alien refugee populations, how they had gradually transcended their original biological limitations, and how they had developed technologies that existed in the spaces between conventional physics. The information was overwhelming in its implications and terrifying in its scope. The Archon Council will never approve it, the Lion said for the 4th time that day, his chromatophores cycling through patterns of anxiety. They'll see it as abandoning everything the Council represents to chase phantom allies and enemies. Commander Kestrix, who had been unusually quiet since their encounter with Valen, finally spoke. They'll approve it because they'll have no choice. The tactical analyses are irrefutable. At current engagement rates, we'll lose the Outer Rim within 2 cycles and face direct attacks on Council worlds within 5. Zephyria had spent hours reviewing Valen's data, and every projection pointed toward the same conclusion. The Devourer's campaign was methodically stripping away the galaxy's defensive capability while simultaneously enhancing their own technological base. Unless something fundamental changed, defeat was not just possible but inevitable. When they arrived at Nethys Prime, the space around the planet buzzed with activity that spoke of barely controlled panic. Refugee ships filled every available docking facility, military vessels moved in tight formation patterns that suggested imminent deployment, and emergency communication traffic overwhelmed the normal civilian channels. 3 more systems went dark while we were away, reported Station Controller Vilix as the whispered truth approached its assigned berth. The Council has authorized general mobilization of all military assets. They're calling it Operation Shield Wall. Kestrix's mandibles clicked with grim amusement. A defensive strategy against an enemy that has already demonstrated the ability to bypass our defenses. They're preparing to fight the last war instead of the current one. The emergency session of the Archon Council convened within hours of their arrival, with representatives attending via quantum entanglement communication from across the galaxy. The Great Spiral Chamber had been reconfigured to accommodate the increased security protocols, with force fields separating different species' atmospheric requirements and translation matrices working overtime to handle the flood of simultaneous discussions. High Archon Thessarian called for order with harmonics that cut through the chaos like a blade. We face unprecedented threats to galactic civilization. Recent attacks have accelerated beyond all predictions, and our response capabilities are stretched to their absolute limits. Counselor Drexena rose with predatory grace, her faction's militaristic philosophy evident in every movement. The time for half measures has passed. We must consolidate our forces around defensible positions and abandon the indefensible outer territories. The outcry from dozens of species was immediate and overwhelming. Zephyria found herself standing before she consciously decided to speak, her throat sac inflating with passionate urgency. High Archon, distinguished counselors, I have information that fundamentally changes our understanding of both the threat we face and the options available to us. She activated the chamber's central display, showing the data Valen had provided. The attackers call themselves the Devourers, and they have been systematically harvesting galactic civilizations for thousands of years. The revelation that the enemy had a name and a history created waves of shocked murmurs throughout the chamber. Zephyria continued, laying out the scope of the Devourer operation and the futility of conventional defensive strategies. Furthermore, she announced, we have encountered allies who have been fighting the Devourers since before any of our current civilizations achieved spaceflight. They possess capabilities that could turn the tide of this conflict, but alliance with them requires risks that could determine the fate of our galaxy. The display shifted to show images of Valen and the human vessel, along with tactical projections of what a combined human council force might accomplish. The chamber fell silent as the implications registered. The legendary humans had returned, bearing knowledge and technology that dwarfed current council capabilities, but requiring trust in beings who had transcended their original nature. Admiral Synthen was the first to speak, her aquatic breathing apparatus bubbling with agitation. You're asking us to bet the survival of our civilizations on the word of beings who claim to be the remnants of a species that vanished 2,000 years ago. I'm asking you to recognize that our current path leads to certain defeat, Zephyria replied. The Devourers are not raiders or conquerors in any sense we understand, they are harvesters and we are their crop. Without fundamental changes to our approach, we will join the thousands of civilizations they have already consumed. Counselor Drexena leaned forward with predatory interest. What exactly are these supposed humans offering? And what do they want in return? They're offering full technological partnership and military alliance, Zephyria explained. Their fleet capabilities, their dimensional manipulation technology, their knowledge of Devourer weaknesses and strategies. In return, they want nothing except the chance to fight for something beyond mere survival. And the risks? High Archon Thessarian asked, though her tone suggested she already understood the answer. Total exposure, Commander Kestrix answered before Zephyria could respond. Currently, the humans remain hidden from the Devourers through technologies we don't understand. Full alliance means abandoning that concealment and betting everything on achieving victory rather than maintaining eternal vigilance. The chamber erupted in discussions as representatives consulted with their home governments and species councils. Some factions saw the proposal as salvation, others as madness, and still others as an elaborate deception. The debate raged for hours with no clear consensus emerging. Finally, High Archon Thessarian called for a formal vote. The question before us is whether to authorize Special Envoy Zephyria to negotiate a formal alliance with the human remnant fleet, understanding that such an alliance fundamentally changes our approach to the current crisis. The voting process took nearly an hour as each species registered their decision through their preferred method. When the final tally appeared on the chamber's displays, Zephyria felt her secondary heart accelerate with a mixture of hope and terror. The motion passed by a margin of exactly one vote. The rendezvous coordinates Valen had provided led them to a region of space that existed in the gaps between star systems. A place where gravitational influences created stable but hidden positions that conventional navigation would never discover. When the whispered truth dropped out of hyperspace, Zephyria gasped at the sight that greeted them. The human remnant fleet was vast beyond anything she had imagined. Hundreds of vessels floated in perfect formation, their flowing designs creating patterns that spoke of advanced mathematical principles and aesthetic philosophies that transcended purely functional engineering. Each ship was unique, reflecting the integration of dozens of different species' technological approaches, yet they formed a cohesive whole that radiated purpose and determination. Fleet composition analysis indicates representatives from at least 40 distinct technological traditions, Nixera reported, her tentacles dancing over her console with excitement. Drive signatures, hull materials, weapon configurations, it's like looking at a museum of extinct civilizations. At the center of the formation, a massive vessel that seemed to exist partially outside normal space served as the fleet's command nexus. Its dimensions defied easy measurement, appearing to shift depending on the angle of observation, and energy readings suggested internal structures that operated on principles beyond current understanding. "Welcome to New Terra," Valen's voice came over the communications channel. "Home to the last free beings of 1,000 worlds." The docking process required the whispered truth to pass through what appeared to be a solid hull section but turned out to be some form of dimensional gateway. The interior spaces they found themselves in were breathtaking. Vast chambers that seemed to stretch beyond physical possibility, containing environments suitable for every conceivable form of life. Zephyria walked through corridors where the walls themselves told stories, displaying holographic murals that depicted the histories of extinct civilizations. Beings that had once been human moved alongside others that represented species she had never encountered, their forms adapted for survival and combat but retaining elements of their original natures. The integration was not easy, Valen explained as he guided them toward the command center. When our worlds fell, we had mere hours to preserve what we could. Technologies, genetic samples, cultural archives, everything that made our civilizations unique had to be compressed into mobile forms that could survive indefinitely in deep space. They passed through a section where children played, beings that appeared to be combinations of multiple species, their laughter creating harmonies that no single race could produce. The sight filled Zephyria with wonder and sadness simultaneously. "You've created new life," she observed. "Not just preserved the old, but allowed it to grow into something unprecedented." "Evolution doesn't stop because of extinction," Valen replied. "It simply takes new forms. These children represent the future we're fighting to protect. Not the recreation of what was lost, but the possibility of what could be." The command center was a sphere of pure information, where holographic displays showed real-time data from across the galaxy. Representatives of dozens of species worked in perfect coordination, their different physiologies and cognitive approaches creating a decision-making matrix that processed information at speeds no single species organization could match. Fleet Admiral Kithra requests your presence, Valen announced, gesturing toward a figure that stood at the center of the sphere. She was one of the first to undergo the integration process, and she commands our combined forces. Admiral Kithra had once been human, but the centuries had transformed her into something that transcended any single species. Her consciousness seemed to extend into the ship's systems themselves, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that suggested multiple vocal systems working in unison. Special Envoy Zephyria, she said, turning to face them with eyes that held depths of experience spanning millennia. Your council's vote was closer than we had hoped but sufficient for our purposes. Are you prepared to begin integration protocols? Integration? Zephyria asked, though she suspected she understood the implications. Full alliance requires more than political agreements, Kithra explained. Our technologies operate on principles that require direct neural interface. Our tactical systems require cognitive integration that transcends normal communication methods. To fight alongside us, your people must be willing to become something more than what they currently are. Commander Kestrix stepped forward, his compound eyes reflecting both determination and concern. What exactly does that involve? Temporary neural enhancement that allows interface with our command systems, Valen answered. The process is reversible, but during active integration the participants become part of our collective consciousness. They experience the memories and perspectives of all our member species. The implications were staggering. To truly ally with the humans meant literally sharing consciousness with beings that had experienced the destruction of their worlds, the transformation of their species, and centuries of hidden warfare. It meant becoming, temporarily, part of something larger than any individual civilization. The alternative, Admiral Kithra continued, is coordination through conventional communication methods, which reduces our combined effectiveness by approximately 70%. Against the Devourers, such reduction virtually guarantees failure. Alarms began sounding throughout the command center, and the holographic display shifted to show a massive Devourer fleet emerging from hyperspace near the Altair system, one of the Council's core worlds, home to over 2 billion beings. They're accelerating their timetable, Kithra observed with the calm of someone who had seen this pattern play out countless times. The vote to ally with us has triggered a response. They're moving to eliminate major population centers before we can complete integration. Zephyria felt her emotional core contracting with terror and determination. How long until they reach Altair? 18 hours at their current velocity, Valen reported. Council fleet response time is 36 hours minimum. And the human fleet? Commander Kestrix asked. Admiral Kithra's expression shifted to something that might have been a smile. We can be there in 6 hours. But effectiveness against a force this size requires full integration protocols with your command staff. The choice crystallized with sudden clarity. They could maintain their individual natures and watch Altair fall, or they could risk everything on a fusion of consciousness that might save billions of lives. What do we need to do? Zephyria asked. The integration chamber aboard New Terra hummed with energies that existed at the intersection of technology and consciousness. Zephyria lay on a crystalline platform that seemed to resonate with her bioelectric field, while similar platforms held Commander Kestrix, the Lion, and representatives from a dozen other council species who had volunteered for the process. Remember, Valen said as the neural interface matrices descended toward their heads, you will experience the memories and perspectives of every being who has undergone this process. Do not fight the connection, allow yourselves to become part of something larger. The moment the interfaces made contact, Zephyria's consciousness exploded outward into a vast network of interconnected minds. She experienced the fall of ancient Earth through human eyes, felt the desperate escape of the Zafrani as their star went nova, shared the terror of the Mindel as devourer ships consumed their crystal cities. But alongside the tragedy came determination, hope, and an unbreakable commitment to ensuring that no other species would suffer the same fate. She was simultaneously herself and part of a collective that spanned centuries and encompassed the wisdom of 1,000 worlds. Her perspective expanded to include tactical thinking that operated on scales beyond individual comprehension, strategic planning that accounted for variables across multiple dimensions, and an understanding of the enemy that came from lifetimes of observation and analysis. The Devourer fleet became visible not just as a collection of ships but as a manifestation of an ancient hunger that had consumed civilizations before the current galactic community had even evolved. She felt the weight of their accumulated technology, saw the twisted logic that drove their expansion, and understood the futility of conventional resistance. But she also felt the power of the combined Human Council alliance flowing through the connection. Technologies that had taken millennia to develop, strategies refined through countless battles, and most importantly, the unshakable conviction that the innocent deserved protection regardless of the cost. The hybrid fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Altair system in perfect formation, their vessels moving with coordination that transcended anything purely mechanical. Zephyria experienced the battle through 100 different perspectives simultaneously, human ships that phased between dimensions to avoid devourer weapons, council vessels enhanced with technologies that multiplied their effectiveness beyond anything previously possible, and tactical coordination that operated at speeds approaching telepathy. The Devourers had expected to face a disorganized council response using conventional weapons and tactics. Instead, they encountered a force that anticipated their movements, countered their strategies, and wielded capabilities they had never encountered. For the first time in millennia, they found themselves facing an enemy that could match their accumulated technological advantages. The battle raged for 17 hours, with neither side able to gain decisive advantage. Devourer ships fell to weapons that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, but their numbers seemed endless, and their adaptability allowed them to counter each new tactic within hours of encountering it. The turning point came when Admiral Kithara implemented a strategy that required coordination across temporal dimensions. Using technologies the humans had developed to exist outside normal space-time, the Allied fleet began attacking the Devourer force across multiple timelines simultaneously. "It's working," the Lion reported through the neural link, his consciousness touching hers with wonder and disbelief. "They can't adapt to threats that exist in past, present, and future simultaneously." But victory came at a cost that Zephyria felt through every connected consciousness. The temporal attacks required human vessels to sacrifice their dimensional concealment permanently, exposing them to detection and retaliation across the galaxy. The strategy that was saving Altair was also ending the humans' ability to remain hidden. "They know where we are now," Valen's presence touched her mind with acceptance rather than regret. "Every Devourer ship in the galaxy can track our signatures. Our time as hidden guardians is over." The Devourer fleet began retreating as their losses mounted beyond sustainable levels, but their departure carried the promise of return with forces specifically designed to counter the new threats they had encountered. The immediate battle was won, but the larger war had entered a new and more dangerous phase. As the neural interfaces withdrew and Zephyria's consciousness contracted back to its individual boundaries, she found herself weeping tears that contained both triumph and loss. They had saved Altair and proven that the Devourers could be defeated, but the cost was the end of humanity's long vigil in the shadows. "What happens now?" she asked Valen as they stood in the observation deck watching the rescued planet rotate peacefully in its star's light. "Now we become what we were always meant to be," he replied. "Not hidden guardians preserving fragments of the past, but partners in building a future worth protecting. The galaxy will face more attacks, and the Devourers will return with new strategies and enhanced capabilities. But for the first time in 2,000 years, they will face united opposition." Zephyria looked out at the combined fleet, human vessels alongside council ships, their crews working together with an integration that transcended species barriers. Children who had never known their homeworlds worked alongside beings whose ancestors had witnessed the birth of galactic civilization, and their collaboration promised possibilities that neither group could achieve alone.